is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's fired. He throws. It is.
And the agony of defeat.
Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
Past Our Prime is on the air. I've always wanted to say that. Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Johnston, one of the three hosts of this podcast. Some people refer to me as Twigs. In fact, oftentimes people have called and asked for Scott Johnston, and I'd have an intern or something be like, I'm sorry, there's no Scott Johnston who works here. They had no idea that my name was Scott.
Was that your nickname? What was everyone's nickname?
Well, that's what I was going to go through. Yes. Yeah. So Mark, I've called you Nammy for forever. I have no idea why.
So in the 80s, in CBS, every one of us had nicknames, okay? Mm-hmm. This Dan Noel was Doc. Eric Bain was Money.
Tony Richards was
Rocket. James Wilcox was Silk.
Jim Hill was Jim.
Yes, right. So how my nickname came about was there was a lady, Nancy Nadimi, a wonderful, nice lady, did Vitafont, and she thought for some reason my name was Norman. So she called me Norman a couple times. So then the guy said, Norman, and Cheers was popular this time. Norm, like Norm from Cheers, like Nam, like Nammy.
There we go.
That's how I got the name.
Yeah.
Nammy.
Yeah, I had a woman at BZ. I worked there for 12 years. She called me Steve. She thought my name was Steve. And you can't correct her after a while, right? After a while, you just go, hey, how you doing? Hi, Sheila. Hey, Steve. Hello. Billy, you got a nickname?
No, I think when I was in elementary school, it was Yame. I don't know what that meant. Then when I was Yame, I don't know. And then when I was in the 80s, it was Billabong. And now,
how you got that one.
And now my daughter, this is exactly what she says. A story. When I was in Vegas, I went to sign our lease at a place, and the lady goes, "Can I get your name?" I said, "It's Bill." I said, "My legal name is William." She goes, "William Bill?" And I said, "No, just Bill. William Bill. Bill. William Bill." So now Callie, the other day, is introducing or telling the lady, goes, "What's your mom's name?" Callie goes, "His name's William Bill." Scott calls him Billy.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So it's William Bill. It's on all my things. I still remember that day, and it stuck. Because I kept telling the lady, no, my legal name's William. My name is Bill. William Bill. And even when I would see her around the complex, she'd go, William Bill. So William Bill.
Well,
now,
Bill,
Scott calls me Billy. Wild Bill when I was a country music guy.
Bill is a nickname.
Yeah, it is.
It's just one of those Jack for John, or it's or Dick for Richard.
Yeah.
But I don't know why it's not a nickname like Nammy.
No, those are great nicknames.
But then when you were on Wipeout, you were Billy Goat.
Billy Goat, because when you went on Wipeout, they wanted you to create an alternate personality so people could relate to you. So because I went on like I did, they wanted to be Billy Goat.
Right. So mine was the same kind of thing. Mine was a created nickname from out of the blue at CBS. I was in a fantasy basketball league that you were probably in.
Yeah.
And but I was like 19 or 20 years old, and they were like, "Oh, well, we're not going to let you. You can't have just Scott's team. You have to have a nickname for your team." And so I was like, okay, how about Scott Shooters? Nope. How about Johnston's Jammers? Nope. I mean. So, Tony and Dan and all them, nope, that no good. And so I read this article about this slow pitch softball guy named Uncle Twiggly's. And he would drink beer, and I think he ended up dying on the pitcher's mound. And I was like, I was like, how about Uncle Twiggly's? And they were like, yes, that's it. Uncle Twiggly's it is. So my actual fantasy team for the longest time has been Uncle Twiggly's. Then it became Twiggly's, and then it became Twigs.
I really, see, now I learned something new because I always thought they called you Twigs.
Because of how slender I am.
Yes, and because you're not fat, but I thought that's why they did. That's very interesting. Didn't you have a car said Twigs?
Twigs EX. It's
That's
a
it.
big mistake.
Yeah.
Because that's one of my emails as well is Twigs space
yes,
EX.
yeah.
Well, there's no space on an email, so I'll be calling up the gas company and be like, and your email is Twigsex. And I'm like, well, not really, but it's Twigs EX. Yeah, that's what I said, Twigsex. Okay, thanks for that.
I had an uncle that called me Marky Boy, but
Marky Boy.
not just it wouldn't be Marky Boy. It'd be Marky
Did he make
Boy.
Did he make you close the door behind you as you were?
Mark, have you ever seen a grown man naked?
You like gladiator movies?
Oh God.
Once again, the premise of this show is that we look back at sports from 50 years ago, and on this date, April 29th, 1974, 50 years ago, you talk about being the stud of all high school studs, man. A kid by the name of Bruce Hardy is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Why? Because he was a high school phenom. He was like the quarterback, the all-state catcher, the all-state basketball player. He was everything. He was just the best athlete you could imagine, and he graced the cover of Sports Illustrated 50 years ago. We'll talk about that in just a bit, but first off, I'm going to talk about the scorecard, which is kind of funny. A week after having Jenny Foley on as a guest, and Jenny was the first little girl to legally play Little League Baseball. This is just the third year in 1974 of allowing women to officially run the Boston Marathon. 36 in total, 36 women, and half of them finished in under 3.5 hours, which is phenomenal. In recent years, that number's up just a bit. This past year, 11,000 female runners ran the marathon. So, there are great stories of women running the race illegally. It was such a women's lib, part of the women's lib movement. And these other ones, they would just run the course. They just weren't allowed to run it officially. But just thought, here we are 50 years later, and now,
And remember, the first lady that tried to run it was tackled almost tackled by the official, and her like football boyfriend pushed him away.
Yeah,
and he said, "Get that number off. You don't belong in here." And she was, how far have they come since then? Which is great.
Well, I saw another stat too, where I think in that '74 marathon there were only 4 women that ran in under 3 hours. And in 2024, there were 99 women. Well, 99 women finished those 3 hours if you go by, I guess, the net. But there's also a gun. Yeah. And they have 105 that did it under 3 hours with the gun.
Yeah, if they shoot at you, you go faster.
Yes.
Right.
Have you guys any of you run a marathon?
Yes.
Did you really?
No.
Oh, no. I ran a half marathon, so I got that.
The farthest I've run is a 5K. I do it every July. The other day, I did a 7.8 mile hike. And I was like, after you take a shower and you sit down for a little bit, and then you try to get back up, then you're all stiff and stuff, and all of a sudden your body's going, what the hell did you do?
That's called rigor mortis.
Wait a second, let me check my pulse.
I'm cold.
Anything else from the scorecard?
Well, we'll get to it later, but they talk about the Twin Derbies.
No, I'm not. We're not. We're either talk about it now or we don't talk about it at all.
We're not coming back to it. Excuse me, Mr. Moss.
I love this one. Rod Laver on He Said It. On his contract negotiations with the LA Strings of World Team Tennis, they made me an offer I could refuse.
That was the original line of The Godfather,
yes.
But then they
I've got Dave McNally. He talks to Brooks Robinson. He said, "You've gone from a human vacuum cleaner to a litter bug." Because they made 3 errors in the first 8 games.
Oh, my goodness. Probably why McNally was pitching.
Yes.
I have our future guest, Tommy John, Dodgers, when he said when they operated on my arm, I asked them to put in Koufax's fastball. They did, but it was Mrs. Koufax's fastball.
Right.
But I heard she gets into the 90s. So
she does. Good cutter, too.
Mr. Tommy John, will be joining us next month as a guest on the Past Our Prime podcast. Looking forward to talking to him about his career and really if he had any idea the influence and impact he would have on the sport of baseball.
I'm curious, too, because if you're a pitcher, what is the worst injury to have? My shoulder hurts, my elbow hurts, I have tightness in my forearm. What is the sign? And usually they say it's the forearm because that's the precursor to something, you know, worse.
All right, speaking of baseball, big fish in turbulent waters. Now, this is the kind of guy that we all had to deal with going into locker rooms. Ooh. Dick Allen, a power-hitting first baseman for the White Sox, the highest-paid player in the game.
And how much?
3 years for a total of $700,000. So about $230,000 a year for Dick Allen, right? Doesn't like the spotlight, prefers to be left alone. Coming back from a broken leg in 73, a Sox doctor said Allen could have returned earlier, but manager Chuck Tanner bristled at that. Team was out of the race. Why rush him back? But now in 74, Allen reported to spring training healthy. But how about this? You read this? In spring training, he had 1 hit in 6 at-bats. He did not like spring training. He preferred to just get his work on the back fields. I mean, now guys get 30, 40, 50 at-bats in Cactus League, Grapefruit League action. He had a run-in with a reporter named Will Grimsley in March. Allen was even more unapproachable by members of the media. He offered to quit the game if it meant he was embarrassing his manager, and Tanner said, no way. A few days ago, Allen was being interviewed by Sports Illustrated, and he wagged his 40-ounce bat like some massive extension of his forefinger in the face of the Sports Illustrated photographer. Any more pictures, and I'll send your camera back in pieces. So
lovely.
He's a pretty happy dude to be around.
Well, but then you talk to Tanner and says he's
Tanner
a wonderful guy.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. There are guys. Eddie Murray was supposedly that way. Yeah. He did not want to talk to me or anyone.
Yeah.
But his teammates loved him.
Swore by him.
Swore by him.
Well, there are a lot of guys. I mean, Chili Davis hated to talk to him.
Chili Davis was that way.
But once you got Chili to talk, he was a fantastic interview.
Well, that was A.J. Pierzynski, same way.
Yeah,
he never talked, and when he did, the interviews were beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing I remember about Dick Allen, first of all, I associate Dick Allen and the White Sox. People don't remember the White Sox for a short period in the early 70s wore red uniforms. You know, mostly they've always been blue or black, you know. But they had a period of time where they wore red, and those were the Dick Allen years, which I remember. Yeah. But a couple things. One, the White Sox got Dick Allen in a trade with the Dodgers that involved, once again, our future guest, Tommy John.
Yeah.
Wow, and that's right. He made the All-Star team 72, 73, 74, all the years with the White Sox. But here's interesting. The 74 season that they're talking about, I think he finished over 300 batting average, had like 32 homers, 88 RBIs, but he quit the team with 2 weeks left in the season. He just left the team.
You really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a strange dude.
September 14th, 1974, he left the team with 2 weeks left.
And that's what the Grimsley was, you know, that type of stuff, that type of attitude is what he said. He submits to no formalities. He's subject to none of the normal niceties that go with being a public figure. So why would he decide? Well, he could quit the game, do what he wanted to do.
74 is his last season in Chicago and really his last great season in baseball. He hit 32 home runs, led the league in slugging and OPS. He's traded to Philly, where he had 2 injury-plagued seasons with the Phils, and he finishes his career in Oakland in 1977. One of the more feared hitters for a good length of time, and one of the more feared players. He was probably not the kind of guy that you're like, hey, I'm going to interview Dick Allen today.
But you know what I heard? You know what I heard about was sort of similar to him was Albert Bell.
Oh my God!
I heard Albert Bell was wonderful in spring training, but by opening day, you could not approach him. Yes.
So he was Joey Bell initially,
that's right,
and then
Joey
became
Bell.
Albert Bell.
That's right.
I did an interview with Albert Bell, and this was actually, I want to say April. Yeah. It was in April, one of the years in the 90s, early 90s. I want to say 91. And he had a hitting coach or some coach that he was really tight with. So the coach was there when I did the interview. And I sat and did like a 15, 20-minute interview with him. And he was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Like any of this negative publicity he had, you would have never guessed.
Wow.
But remember I told you that Allen quit the team with 2 weeks left of the season? So he actually blamed the feud with, at that time, a Chicago legend, but now with the White Sox, Ron Santos, and he blamed him for the feud. Now, I think it's important, Santo.
Or lovable
right.
Did you meet him?
Chicago
Did
guys.
you meet him?
Yeah.
Just as a high,
Okay.
But apparently he and Allen, for whatever reason, I don't know.
Well, there are some veteran guys that are kind of like, hey, could you chill out a little bit?
Yeah.
It's not that big a deal. It's part of the deal. You're making, buku bucks. You can not be an SOB for a little bit.
All the time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like me.
Yes. I
Yes.
would, you couldn't pay me enough to talk to Mark Hoffman.
Yes, he just goes off.
Well, that's how I got on the podcast. I paid.
Right.
He's got a lot of money.
Right? When he's not streaking.
That's
he's
right.
Just
Yep.
Or I threatened to streak.
letting it
and
all
he-
hang out.
I threatened to streak, and so I says, okay, you can be on the podcast. Just don't streak.
No advantage facing Stanford. The nation's best college tennis team crushed its downstate rivals USC and UCLA in back-to-back matches. This is about college tennis in the 70s, Stanford. And while I'm reading it, all I could think of the entire time was the movie Revenge of the Nerds. Because, and not the lovable nerds, but the Ted McGinley and
Yes.
John Goodman
Yeah.
ones. Because, the guys that wear their sweaters
Yes.
around,
Yes.
going to play tennis.
Right.
And, I'm not saying that that's how Biffy and all of these guys
Yes,
were,
yes.
but I mean, Stanford tennis in the 70s. Wow. Anyway, they were great. They got their butts handed to them when they came down south, losing to both UCLA and USC, and they were looking for revenge. And the two Southern California teams went up there, and Stanford smoked them in front of 14,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the one thing that I didn't realize about this. Stanford was the Indians
Right.
in the early 70s.
Yes.
Right,
Now they're the
that's right.
Stanford Cardinal.
Right.
But there was a period of time when they were nothing. They did not go from the Indians to the Cardinal, and I never knew that. They were
Yeah.
just Stanford for a long time. So they were called the school without a mascot.
Well, they had a
Wow,
tree.
Tree, they still do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I applied to
And,
Stanford.
and they have the
How'd that go?
for the band. Did you apply for the band?
Let's just say I wasn't the sharpest tool when I was in high school.
Well, Stanford is interesting.
I
They
don't
have
know
all
what
the-
it cost, but that was not money well spent to
No.
apply to that one.
They sent me no.
You got it framed?
No, they called me to the counselor's office and said, when you took the ACT, you picked 3 schools to send an application to. I said, I did? They go, yeah, Stanford was one of them. And they go, they rejected you. I thought, wow, 185?
You meant what happened was you meant to send it to Stamford.
Yeah, it must
which is
have
a
been.
school in
Or
Connecticut.
Samford.
Right.
I was literally the Animal House kid before then, so I just,
But Stanford has a
Fat,
crazy
drunk,
band.
and stupid. There's no way to go through life.
Yeah, I was everything but the fat.
But Stanford had the great marching band. Their
They did.
theme song is the rock song by Free All Right
Yeah.
Now. I mean, come on.
No.
But you can't take it away. I just like the fact that I like the little things, like Dick Gould.
Yeah.
He was the coach. When you have a record of 776 and 148, he had 10 NCAA singles winners and 9 doubles winners. That and 17 team championships. That to me is just you don't get. I mean, they talk John Wooden and basketball and that. I get it, but you look at a guy like that. That is phenomenal because you're working with different guys every year.
I don't know if it's still the case, but maybe 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and it still could be. I mean, you take away basketball and football, the two big ones.
Yeah.
Stanford had more national championships every year,
Yeah.
like combined, than any other school. They're an unbelievable program.
Yeah.
But these were the sports they would dominate in. Your tennis, your women's tennis, your women's volleyball, obviously women's basketball for a long time they were great at. So yeah, a great school for athletics.
Well, in '73 they won their first title, and then in '74 they repeated. So, like I said, 17 titles.
Yeah,
So
that's
'73 was the beginning of the run, and I think Gold was there from '67 to 2004.
Yeah.
So he was there a long time.
And then when they won, they all screamed, "Nerds!" Dr. J and the Whopper shell the Colonels. I always loved the Whopper. Billy
Loved
Paul's,
him.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Just to talk about nicknames, man. That is one. I'm not sure you would love to have the nickname as the Whopper, but Billy Paul's was a good player. They were a 1-2 combo, him and Dr. J. New York starters, average age is 23 with Paultz, the oldest at 25. They go up 2-0 in the series over Kentucky. A tornado blew away some of Freedom Hall in Louisville, so they had to finish the rest of the Colonels off, led by the magnificent Julius Erving. They did. I'm sure I'm getting ahead of myself, but Dr. J and the Nets go on to win the ABA championship that year, and
Over the Utah Stars.
over the Stars
That's right.
of Utah.
But Billy Paltz, they called him the Whopper. He was 6'11", 235. He wouldn't be the Whopper in basketball nowadays.
No,
I mean, I just thought the change, because back then, I loved him with San Antonio. I just loved him. I thought, man, he was so cool, and I love that nickname. But now when you look at the weight and the height, you go, he'd be actually small.
Up 2-0 in the series. Game 3 was tied with 17 seconds left when Kevin Lockery ran what Peter Vesey told us was the play he came up with at Rucker Park for Julius. It's the everyone get out of the way and give it to Julius play.
Right.
And the doctor didn't disappoint, hitting a shot at the buzzer. Game 3 to the Nets. They would go on to sweep the Colonels and advance to the final.
I always just think it's unfortunate that Dr. J was the time he was.
Yeah.
And that we never really got to see him as that. I mean, because TV wasn't as big
Right.
back then. It would have been just amazing to see him.
So we saw a little bit at the end when
Yeah.
the Sixers and Lakers were playing. He had those, 2 unbelievable shots against the
Yeah,
Lakers.
Right.
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I put him and David Thompson in that same
Yes,
category.
yes.
They were just
Before their time.
mythical.
Yes.
Because you just didn't get to see them in person enough. But you talk to a Peter Vesey about Dr. J and he talks about how all their mouths were just left wide open seeing what this kid could do.
Yeah,
So,
remember how when he talked, you're right, when he talked about Dr. J, he lit up.
Yeah.
Like he was just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's,
We had never seen anything like it.
no.
All right, our cover story, Bruce Hardy, All-American boy. Once upon a town in Utah, there was a basketball star, a football whiz, a baseball flash, and an all-around excellent student. In true storybook fashion, they are all the same guy. This is a story about Bruce Hardy, and as I just mentioned, he could do it all. He was also a prom king, I believe. He was the president of the Men's Association, B+ average. Just an unbelievable athlete, and he is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. For some reason, he's holding a football in the middle of a highway. I never quite got the reason for that.
The long road ahead.
That's what I was just thinking, Mark.
right?
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Or any road to get out of this small town. I don't know.
I don't think he ever wanted to get out, though.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
One of his teachers jokes that they should rename the high school Bruce Hardy High School and just be done with it. It's kind of amazing if that hasn't happened because he was an unbelievable player. He's 6'4", 205. They argue over which sport he's best at. He was all-state as a junior in football, baseball, and basketball. MVP of all of them, co-captain of all of them. One thing that jumped out at me in his junior in hoops is the team is 7-10 in the regular season, but in the playoffs, Bruce gets hot, carries the team to the state finals, and scores 34 points to win the finals of the state championship. So he just could do it all.
He could turn it on when he wanted to.
Yeah. Scouted by the A's, who says he's the best athlete he's seen in 20 years, but he wants to play football. He wants to be a quarterback in the NFL. That was his goal. How good of an athlete was he? He took up tennis just for fun and promptly beat the #1 man on his high school team. Hadn't even played tennis and beats him. So his dad pressured him quite a bit. There's a lot of stuff in the article about his dad saying, what college is going to want you after your performance, blah, blah. Wasn't on a great high school team, not football-wise.
No.
I mean, he was the team, ends up going to college at Arizona State.
Right. Frank Kush.
Under Frank Kush, who was a known as a hard ass, right?
So he said it's like his dad, who was
Right.
Yeah.
And then Bruce goes on to have a 12-year NFL career. I mean, think of that. By no means
As a tight end.
Yeah. Catching passes from a guy named Dan Marino.
Yep.
Right? So had a great NFL career, and we would have loved to have talked to him on this show, but Bill, you did everything but drive to his house.
We both did. He's a ghost, man. I mean, we went through high school. You tried his colleges. We tried teams he coached.
Right.
That man, I did a letter because you can't get emails to some of these 80-year-olds and or 70-year-olds. I sent written letters. I mean, this guy is a ghost. We did everything we could just to get him on the show, and no go.
Nope, didn't happen.
So his girlfriend apparently did not want him to go to Arizona State, according to the article, because it's warm there. There are too many girls there, and not a lot of clothing, and so she didn't want him to get tempted, But I guess her poll didn't work.
No.
Well, because there's not attractive gals at any other colleges other than the ones that are, in the shade, in the sun.
Right. People section. Let's move on. Cardinals infielder Mike Tyson, not the boxer. If it had been the boxer, these guys would have been in trouble. Tells the story of how when he was at a hotel on a road trip in Philly, he got a call asking if his air conditioning was working. He said, I don't know. So they sent somebody up to look at it, and he opens up his door, and he's looking into the barrel of a shotgun. So they got a wallet and his roommate's expensive tape recorder, and about an hour later, they picked up the guy who did it.
Oh, I got a couple people things.
Oh, go ahead.
One is Walt Frazier. So he played for the Knicks, started for the Knicks. He actually, even though he had a $20,000 Rolls Royce, he liked to take the subway to Madison Square Garden to the game. So they got a picture of him riding the subway.
That's awesome.
And it's just odd, but he's got the fedora on and this dark suit and a white tie. He looks like something out of an Al Capone movie.
Right.
But can you imagine getting on the subway and seeing LeBron there, taking it down to crypto?
Just hanging out.
Yeah. Well, I had that happen once, actually. I was at an A's game in 81, and, I was the kind of dork that would go to the game well before it started to get autographs in the parking lot, and I would stay until the very end, till the players walked out of the parking lot. And I would I took Bart to the game, and Tony Armas hits a home run to win the game. Now it's called a walk-off. It wasn't called that then. Hits a walk-off home run to win the game, and 2 hours later, I'm on the Bart train, and I'm sitting right across from Tony Armas.
Oh, wow.
What'd you say to him?
I looked at him, and I just smiled, and he smiled at me, and I said, nice hit. And he just said, thanks. And
why are you taking the subway?
And I was like, yeah, why are you taking Bart? But, that's what they did for the longest time. That's what they did.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dodgers have the private area where all the players walk to their car and back. You can't get to them.
That's what Linda Ruth said about, Babe. Babe loved being around the fans and stuff, and now they made this new Yankee Stadium, and there's no access to the players for the fans to see them come in and out. And you get it. There's so many wackos now that you got to be careful, but it's just a shame.
I saw Bob Welch at Disneyland once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were walking down Main Street. That's when, there wasn't a player that could have gotten by me because I knew their face. And he was tall, too. Bob Welch was 6'6".
6'5",
yeah. So I'm walking, I thought, that's Bob Welch. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and you could just read his eyes. Please don't say anything. So I didn't. I just walked by because you know that part of you want to go, Bob Welch!
Right. What year about it, if you had to guess? Are you in high school, before high school?
Yes, it had to be a little bit after. I mean, he was big with the Dodgers. Was it 78? He struck out Jackson. Yeah. When was the year he won 25 games with the A's?
88.
So it would have been around 89.
27 games.
Yeah, but about 89.
There was one other one I want to talk about quickly in the people section was, so Bob Boyd was the head coach at USC, okay? And he's overshadowed by John Wooden in UCLA all the time. So he lives in Placentia. So what does the city of Placentia do? They not only have a John Wooden Street, but they then create his wife, a Nell Wooden. So he just can't get away. Right. He said, they probably want me to cut the ribbon.
Yeah.
Who's going to cut the ribbon?
Yeah. I'll cut your ribbon.
Seinfeld can always make an appearance.
I'm not going to cut the ribbon. Mr. Intensity of the Expos about Montreal pitcher Steve Rogers. And I was thinking about this when we did our 1974 baseball preview issue, that we forgot to touch on a little bit of the NL East, and one of them being when he came up in 73 and was just dominant. Yeah. He was 10-5 with a 1.54 ERA, and his manager Gene Mock said it was the greatest 2.5 months he's ever seen, and he did it as a rookie. Now he's off to a 3-0 start in 74, but things would kind of go off the rails for him at that point. He finished 74 with a record of 15 wins and 22 losses. Now imagine that, 37 decisions. That's unheard of now.
Yeah, it never happened.
It turned out to be the worst season of his 13-year career, starting in 1977. He was one of the best pitchers in the NL, culminating in 1982 when he finished second in the Cy Young. But, one of those really good under-the-radar pitchers for a long time. Not quite Hall of Fame, but just,
he's
really,
in that Hall of Very Good.
Hall of Very Good,
Yep.
for sure. For sure.
He averaged 33 starts a year his entire 13-year career.
Isn't that amazing?
That is, nowadays everyone's injured, but I'm saying at the time they must have been doing something different.
And like we say all the time, and we're talking 250 innings and stuff.
Yes, it wasn't 180.
Billy, the Indians bullpen.
Oh, yeah. The Cleveland's bullpen was labeled Gasoline Alley by a local sports writer who claimed Indian firemen arrive on the scene with gasoline in their hoses. In their last 28 innings, they've given up 20 earned runs. So it's actually very, very good name for them.
So this is the great part about what we're doing with this is the worst of that performances was by a guy named Tom Hilgendorf, who gave up 4 home runs in his one inning of work or whatever. So I saw that Tom passed away 2 years ago, and I thought, I'm not going to just bring up this one guy's worst moment as a major leaguer. I'm going to look and see. Okay, so let's look him up. Had a career ERA of 3.04 in 6 years in the bigs. But get this. He was hit in the head by a steel chair on June 4th, 1974, on the infamous 10-cent beer night in Cleveland that turned into a drunken riot. Had to be escorted off the field by a security guard. A month later, he's in Anaheim, and he takes a shortcut in the hotel past the pool. He notices 13-year-old Jerry Seradite in distress, overcome by cramps, and the kid had sunk to the bottom of the pool. He dives into the pool fully dressed and rescues the kid. So there you have it, right? Here's a guy that we're reading about, and he gets shelled, right? And that's the only time we're ever going to hear about Tom Hilgendorf 50 years later. And he saved a kid's life, and he took a chair over the head. I mean, these people all have stories. I just love when you come across that stuff.
We talked about that. This is the best thing sometimes, because what you did is you read that and you went to someplace else to look up more stuff. That's the best thing about doing this show, is the interesting things we learn, not just from the magazine, but the articles we can find away from it.
Yeah.
I like the part where it's they're talking about the Padres and their manager, John McNamara, who's Mr. Optimist, who said that I think we can win in nearly 80 games, close to a 500 record. What did they do that year? They were 60 and 102. They finished 42 games behind the Dodgers.
My goodness.
They had been out at the point when he said that. They had been outscored 99-34. Out homered 12-2, and already been shut out 4 times. Wow. And the team had made 23 errors already. That's just all around bad.
Yeah. Well, Dodgers got off to a good start, thanks in part to Tommy John, who is 4-0, and Reds manager Sparky Anderson said, they better not get too gay.
I was just about to say, that's my exact one. I kept thinking, we wouldn't use that word nowadays.
Yeah.
But for most people that don't know, that maybe are younger, gay at one point in time was fun.
Right, happy.
Yeah, happy.
To go have a time.
Don't get too happy. It was like, oh, hey, let's, gay Paris.
The gay
90s.
yes.
Gay
the
90s.
1890s
Exactly.
were known as the gay 90s. Everyone was having a good
now
time.
We don our gay apparel.
Yes.
Ba la 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 la, right? Poor power for New York. Players way down the Rangers' salary scale rose up to reprieve their teammates by beating Montreal, and along came Philadelphia. Bill, Stanley Cup playoffs. Flyers might just steal this thing, huh?
Well, yeah, when you've got a team led by Bobby Clark and the Hammer and the Hound, and also you had arguably, I think I read something recently that one guy ranked him the 6th greatest goaltender ever. We're talking about Bernie Perron, one of the greatest goaltending ever. And you look at his stats. What do you have in 74, Scott? What did he start? 47 games, was it? Or 73?
73
73,
147.
147, yes. And his goals against was 1.89 with 12 shutouts.
Yeah.
That's, I remember once playing in television, and I played a whole season of hockey. I won 63 games. That was video game.
Right.
What he did was unbelievable.
Yeah, you know how they say in hockey, you get a hot goalie and you got a chance.
Yes.
Well, they had a hot goalie all year.
Yes. Yeah, they had a hot goalie for 2 years.
Yeah.
Because they won the Stanley Cup, and then in the third year, he injured his back early in the year. They still made it back to the Stanley Cup, and I'm a believer to today. If he doesn't hurt his back, they're 3-time winners.
Right.
They're 3-time. Then they're up there with the Islanders, the Oilers, and the Canadians that win those series in a row.
Yeah. Bernie will be joining us next week to talk about his time in Philly, 2-time Conn Smythe winner, 2-time Vezina Trophy Award winner. Looking forward to talking with him. Told he's a great guy. And
God, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking just like legendary players from whatever sport, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
He is so good.
The Sun Shines Bright. This is an article by Frank DeFord, who I think every time I say his name is one of my favorites. It's about the 100th running of the Kentucky Derby. And DeFord writes, the governor of Kentucky, Wendell Ford, stood up at a Derby week dinner last festival time and made an observation. What he said, seriously, word for word, was, the 100th Kentucky Derby will be the greatest thing that ever happened on the face of the United States. DeFord writes, imagine a grown man going around telling people things like that. Only because the Derby itself is truly special can it suffer such nonsense, survive, and prosper. So he's being kind of tongue-in-cheeky, and he gets that the guy's selling the race, but he also is like, come on, man, it's just a horse race.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
2 minutes, yeah. He goes on, the kids cram together in the infield, sail frisbees, sun themselves, smoke some grass, and do approximately what they would do anyplace else. The main difference between the kids and the rich and famous adults in the millionaires' row boxes is that the kids have a great time and can't see the race, while those in millionaires' row have a great time and can see the race. So, but the kids are there, and when I say kids, I think he means obviously like, late teenagers and early 20s. And I'm pretty sure, Mark, that this is going to be, but there's probably some streaking going on there at the Derby.
We can only hope, but it was so interesting because right before they got into that big article from DeFore, they also were talking about the Wood Memorial, which was a big race before it in New York, I believe. And they had so many entries, they had to split it. They had to do 2 races, so there were 2 winners. And there was talk that was going to happen with the Kentucky Derby because they had so many entrants into that. So the 100th Kentucky Derby is very interesting because it follows on the heels of the 99th, which featured maybe the greatest horse of all time, Secretariat.
Right.
So you're coming off of that into the 100th anniversary.
Right.
And then, what's going to happen? Is it going to be 2 races, which has never happened before, like the Wood Memorial? Or are they going to figure out a way to race with just one time and cut down the number of horses? And can it even match, what Secretariat had done the year before?
Right, because people remember the Secretariat run at the Belmont, but Secretariat to this day still holds the fastest time for the Derby. So just a phenomenal horse. I thought this was great. Page 91. This is a page from Mark's textbook, but it's possible Bill's mentioned this before. It's an ad for Terryton cigarettes.
Oh, yeah.
The slogan is, us Terryton smokers would rather fight than switch.
That's right. The guy's got a black eye.
No, this is a picture of a woman with the black eye.
Yeah, that's like...
Oh, my.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, whoa,
hit her?
Someone drilled Barbara, but she wasn't giving up her cigarettes.
It's actually okay. It was her kid who did it.
Oh, okay. That's
well, my mom used to smoke Tarrington, and I remember she got in a whole bunch of fights.
Yeah, did you ever slug her?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah. And she'd go to bars and just, get away from my
Give me a
Tarringtons.
lighter!
Yeah, that's right.
My mom smoked Kents and then Virginia Slims.
So, on smoking, my dad used to drink Bush and Hams. Did you guys have
Hams?
Those?
It was a big sponsor of Chicago Cubs baseball in the 60s.
Yeah,
Hams.
I think I had Hams. I don't know.
I think
where
I went low
I
end.
had Strohs.
Oh, yeah.
Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, whatever was on sale.
Old Milwaukee.
Yeah.
We used to get there was the plain label just said beer. That's how wealthy
That's
we
always
were.
like if they don't have a sponsor in a movie or TV
Yes.
show, the can just says like beer
Well,
on it.
it's like when they do a college, it's always state.
Yeah.
They're going to state U. Yeah.
Right. The horse racing article moves on by DeFord to an interview with Don Meade, a former jockey who was 60 years old in 74. For a time, he was the best jockey there was, but he was difficult. An old trainer said that he thinks he knows everything. Quote, that SOB knew who the unknown soldier was. Meade tells the story of how he got to ride in the Derby the first time for a man named Colonel Bradley and winning with broker's tip in the 33 Derby in what was known as the fighting finish. And that was because, Billy?
They were swinging at each other. They got too close.
Yeah.
And so the one guy was it
Herb Fisher.
Meade grabbed his like arm, and the other guy was grabbing his whip, and they were going right down the stretch. Thank you. And they were fighting. And the most amazing thing, someone's got a picture of it.
Yes.
If you look up that fighting finish, you can see the two guys with their arms on each other pushing and hitting. It's a great shot. It's an amazing shot.
They are fighting all the way to the finish line. It's a photo finish. Broker's tip, ridden by Meade, wins by a nose. Afterwards, they go to the jockey room and they continue to fight. Yep. They were both suspended for 30 days, meaning neither could ride in the Preakness. In fact, Broker's tip wins the Kentucky Derby and never won another race.
And also, Fisher and Meade became friends later on because Meade felt bad. He said, you're looking at one guy's career and that's the one thing you're taking from it. Him and Fisher actually made up.
If you like Frank DeFord, it's him at his best.
Oh, gotcha.
Just little nuggets throughout this article, well worth the read. And if you miss horse racing, when horse racing was big, it was, for a while there, horse racing was as big as any sport in the country.
Sport of Kings.
It was. Kings. It would shut things down. The big races.
Now, of course, the Kentucky Derby is in just a few days. It will be the 150th Kentucky Derby, which you can see on NBC Sports. Randy Moss joins us now. Randy serves as an analyst for NBC Sports horse racing coverage, including the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, the Breeders' Cup, World Championships. He joined NBC in 2011, part of the broadcasts in chronicling a pair of Triple Crown winners, American Pharoah in 2015, Justify in 2018. That was when we thought we might never see another Triple Crown winner, so we got two in a span of 3 years. He started at Dallas Morning News, ESPN, NBC, 5 Olympics, Super Bowls. I met him at the NFL Network. And like I said off the air a little bit ago, we were used to being at Patriots games at 5 a.m. for an AFC championship game. And Randy and I are both wearing shorts. We were not wearing shorts then, were we, my friend?
Oh, no. I had some pretty chilly mornings at Lambeau Field as well. So it's nice to be to not have to worry about those below zero mornings in football anymore.
I mentioned that we have the 150th Derby coming up, but our show is rarely about the future. It's usually about the past. So let's start off, Randy, about the 100th Kentucky Derby. Back in 1974, Hall of Famer Woody Stevens is the trainer. Hall of Famer Angel Cordero is the jockey. Cannonade is the horse. What can you tell us about any and all three of those legendary characters?
I remember watching the race on television. I was 15 years old. My parents were actually there because it was the 100th anniversary. And that was a pretty remarkable race on a lot of different levels. There was concern all week long leading up to that Kentucky Derby that so many horses were going to be entered in the Derby. And there was no limit back then in 1974. When they started Derby week, at least, there was concern that so many horses would be entered in the Derby that they would have to split the race into 2 divisions and actually have 2 Kentucky Derbies. And there was stress all week long about that until on Wednesday of Derby week, the Kentucky Racing Commission passed a new rule saying that the limit for the Kentucky Derby would be 24, and there would be no splitting the Derby into 2 divisions. As it turned out, 23 horses wound up running in that Centennial Kentucky Derby. It remains the largest field in the history of the race. Back in 1928, there was a 22-horse field, but it was a gigantic field. At the time, it was a record crowd for the Centennial. 163,000 people turned out. That was a record that would stand for 37 years as far as Derby attendance was concerned. And it was an all-star cast in the winner's circle, as you pointed out. Woody Stevens, legendary horse trainer. Angel Cordero Jr., legendary rider. It was Kentucky Derby win each. Woody was 60 years old at the time. Angel was 31. would go on to a tremendous amount of success later on in his career. So a lot of very interesting things about that Kentucky Derby.
I imagine, Randy, when you're, what's a normal amount of horses in the Kentucky Derby? In the high teens?
No, it's changed. Now it's 20. It's almost
20.
Every year there are 20 horses because there is now a 20-horse limit. As a matter of fact, in the 1974 Derby with 23 horses, the crowding in that race was so severe that Lafitte Pincay Jr., who was the most successful jockey in America at the time, was on the favorite named Judger, and he likened the Derby to a rodeo. And there were all sorts of traffic issues in that 74 Derby. And it so much so that in December of 1974, the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission passed a new rule. Actually, let me correct that. It was the Churchill Downs Board of Directors in December of 1974 passed a rule that henceforth the Derby would be limited to 20 horses based on earnings. The qualifications have changed throughout the years, but it has remained a 20-horse maximum ever since late 1974. So now, pretty much every year, you're going to have 20 horses entered in the Derby. Some may scratch, like the day of the race or the day before. It may turn out to be 19, 18, but every year 20 are entered.
That's a lot of horses for you to be, ready to be talking about. How do you get all that much homework on some of these guys?
It's a lot. It is a lot. Well, it's not only that, Scott, because we've got 14 other races that we cover as well, in addition to the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks. So we got to be well versed on those as well. Well, we started a week or two ago with the other races, with the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks on Friday. We've been covering those horses in the prep races really since they were 2-year-olds, and also, early this winter and a little bit earlier in the spring. So we're pretty familiar with those. But now 2 years ago, there was a late entrant into the Derby. He was on the wait list, basically. It's called the also eligibles. And one of the horses dropped out on Friday morning, and this horse managed to make it into the field as the 20th horse in the race. He wore saddle towel number 22, I believe. And he was such a long shot that me and my broadcast buddy, Jerry Bailey, former jockey, looked at the horse and said, do we even need to call this guy? Do we even need to do research on this horse? Nah. Rich Strike was the horse's name, who wound up winning the Kentucky Derby in 2022 as one of the biggest long shots in the history of the race, right? And we were caught with our pants down, basically. But there was enough that went on during the race that there was plenty to talk about, right? And we had all the facts of the horse in front of us. But it would have been nice, a phone call, and maybe gotten a little bit extra ammunition. But we didn't think the horse had a shot. Lesson learned.
Live TV.
It's interesting because you were talking about how close it came to splitting the Kentucky Derby into 2 races. And I know the Wood Memorial, which was just prior, had the same issue, and they actually did run 2 races. Did the Kentucky Derby people look at that and say, that's not something we want to do?
They did not want to split the Kentucky Derby at all. And they stressed about that greatly all week long before the 74 Derby. But back then, there was a philosophy that it was really poor form to exclude any owner that wanted to run his 3-year-old in the Kentucky Derby and paid his money to get in, right? And when on Wednesday of Derby week, when the Kentucky Racing Commission passed that 24-horse rule, they also included a stipulation that if more than 24 horses entered, it would be the responsibility of one man, the racing secretary, a legendary man named Tommy Trotter at Churchill Downs, to decide who got to run in the Derby and who didn't. And he was very upset about that. He did not want that responsibility to be the guy who made that decision. And he was the one stressing more than anyone all week long about the number of horses that were entered. And fortunately for Tommy Trotter, it was 23 and not 25.
the fact that Secretariat won the year before, was that a reason why there was so many horses, or was it just a coincidence that this year there just happened to be so many horses where the owners thought they had a shot at winning the Derby?
A little bit of that. A lot of Judger, the favorite, the one that I mentioned, was ridden by Lafitte Pincay. He was an entry mate actually with Cannonade. They were 1 and 1A, but Judger had beaten Cannonade at all 3 of the previous times they had run against each other. And so Judger was considered to be the horse to beat in the Kentucky Derby, right? And he had won the Florida Derby and then the Bluegrass Stakes. But all the other prep races had been taken by different horses. So there were no other dominating horses that year. There were a lot of horses that were considered in the mix. And also, I think there were a lot of owners that really wanted to be a part of this 100th anniversary Kentucky Derby. So it was kind of a two-pronged thing.
Randy, Secretariat wins in 73. He's the story of the year. He wins the Belmont. Everyone remembers that, but the Derby, he sets a track record there that I believe still stands to this day. The next year, could any horse live up to the barometer that Secretariat had set?
No. I mean, the 70s was a golden era in horse racing in terms of the quality of horses that competed in the Triple Crown, right? Throughout the 1970s, it was the best collection of horses of any decade in the history of the Derby. But Secretariat obviously was at the very, very top of that list. And even today, Secretariat is considered by most people to be right up there with Man o' War as the greatest American racehorse in history. Some will say Secretariat, some will say Man o' War, who raced way back in the late 19-teens and 1920. But later on in the 1970s, after Secretariat, who was the first Triple Crown winner in 25 years since Citation in 1948, you had in 1977, Seattle Slew swept the Triple Crown. The very next year in 1978, Affirmed, who had these legendary battles with his arch rival Aladar, swept the Triple Crown that year, Aladar finishing second in all 3 legs. And then in 1979, perhaps a horse that was even better than Seattle Slew and Affirmed, a horse called Spectacular Bid, won the Derby, won the Preakness, and was upset in famous fashion in the Belmont Stakes. So a lot of great horses ran in the 1970s.
Randy, I'm going to sort of go off this a little. I just want to know, you see this, you know it, you understand it. What do you love about the Kentucky Derby?
Well, since this will be my 44th Kentucky Derby, I guess it's no longer a bucket list item for me. As it is with a lot of people.
Runneth over.
It all is for us.
As it is with a lot of people, and understandably so. It's an event, and I've never been to the Indy 500, so I can't really compare the two. A lot of people who have been to both will liken the Derby and the Indy 500. It's really a slice of Americana. There's so much history involved. I think that resonates with many people, the way they dress up, like in the old days. It's arguably the greatest horse race in the world. I've had people in England, Ireland, France tell me that they believe the Kentucky Derby is the greatest horse race in the world. And it's just a spectacle. 100,000 plus people every year, 150,000 last year. It's burdensome sometimes because so many people are there, but you definitely get the impression that you're where the action is when you're at the Kentucky Derby. It's an experience.
Do you get to enjoy it doing what you're doing, or are you just so caught up that I remember there's been certain times where I did shows from Honolulu when I was covering the Lakers, and I could have been in Detroit. It made no difference because I was in a basketball gym the whole time. You know what I mean? So are you able to take it all in?
Not really. No. I've had friends that went to the Derby and, hey, we went to the Barnstable Brown party, this great party the night before. We went to this party. how many times have you been to those parties? I'm like, zero.
Yeah.
I'm up until 10, 11 p.m. the night before in my hotel room studying for the next day. Thursday for Friday, Friday for Saturday. We got to get there like at 8 o'clock in the morning. We're on the set like at 10:30 a.m. It's a grind. The year that I don't go to the Kentucky Derby, I'm sure I'll miss it, but you never really have a chance to kick back and enjoy it because, as you know from your experience, you're in work mode the whole time.
Right.
And that's exactly what people say. They look at you and they go, he's having the greatest life. He's at all the parties. There's so much work that you have to put into this. How many hours you think goes into getting all this together that you can actually go on TV and explain it to the average Joe?
Well, look, there's this. I mentioned there are 14 other races other than the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks that we have to cover. And if we wait until the entries are officially taken to start doing all of that research on those horses, we're completely screwed. I mean, there's no way to do all that in addition to the Derby and the Oaks. So just in the past week, I think I've texted, I think the number is now up to 105 different trainers to get their plans about which horses they're going to be running in the undercard races. I actually know more about who's going to run in those races than the people at Churchill Downs do. And that's how the preparation starts, because you get an early jump on your homework, right? And so when your boots on the ground at Churchill Downs and you're ready to go talk to these people in person, the same people that you've been texting for the last 2 weeks, it's nice to get a head start. But I mean, look, just in Louisville alone, from Sunday until the end of the races on Saturday, the hours are typically, I want to say, we head to Starbucks about 6 a.m. and then from there straight to the racetrack, and typically lights out at about midnight. And it's all work. I mean, you have to keep a break for dinner, obviously, and lunch when it's available. Sure.
But you're not going to the movies.
Yeah.
No.
No
parties.
All the Kentucky,
right.
Man.
Out of all the Kentucky Derbies that you've covered, do you have a favorite memory or two from any of them?
The Kentucky. Oh my gosh, not really, because my first Derby was 1980. Right. And I guess that probably would be the highlight, simply because it was my first. And also back then, now I was 21 years old, and I started in the business really as a newspaper handicapper at age 13 in Arkansas. So I've been around horse racing for a long, long time. It was under somebody else's name until I got out of college, because they didn't want anybody to know a 13-year-old was dispensing financial advice, right? So now at age 21, I'm at the Kentucky Derby. And back then in the press box at Churchill Downs, they seated you by seniority. There were inside seats, right? But then in the old press box, there was an outside patio where you were right above the finish line. And the seats were numbered. Number 1 was the person who had covered the most Kentucky Derbies. Number 2, the second most, and so on and so forth. Well, I was so new that my seat was like in the janitorial closet in the press box. I had never been to the Derby, obviously. I had no seat outside. So I'm kind of hanging around. I brought my binoculars because I had no idea what the seating situation was. And now I'm hanging around in the press box. I'm underneath the TV. And this old gentleman comes up to me. His name was Raul Carlisle. He was like 85 years old. And he was a legend in the sports business back then. And he said, Randy, he said, I'm old. I can't see. I didn't bring any binoculars. Would you like to take my seat to watch the Kentucky Derby? And I said, Raul, that would be fantastic. Are you sure it's okay? And he said, well, I'll have to bring you over and introduce you to the guys so they know you're not trying to crash the seating arrangements or anything. So he said, follow me. So Raul Carlisle had seat number 2. Ooh. And he took me over and he said, gentlemen, I want you to meet this young man, Randy Moss. Randy Moss, I'd like you to meet Red Smith. who was in seat number 1, and Dick Young,
Oh my goodness.
gosh.
who was in seat number 3. As it turned out, Raul Carlisle in the middle, seat number 2, should have been in seat number 3, but Red Smith and Dick Young were arch enemies, and they
Yes,
could
that's
not be
right.
seated next to each other in the press box. So Raul was the
Oh
buffer
my God.
in seat number 2, and for the 1980 Kentucky Derby, I turned out to be the buffer at age 21, right between Red Smith and Dick Young for my very first Kentucky Derby.
That is a great story. Wonderful. Let me ask you, Randy, if you had to describe now the state of racing in 2024, what would you say? And because we talk about Secretariat, and then you just, you list off those names: Seattle Slew and Affirmed and Alydar and Spectacular Bid, and I mean, it's like it was yesterday. And yet, when we were coming up here to do the show, I couldn't remember the 2 Triple Crown winners that won in the last 10 years. Where is the state of racing these days?
Well, I mean, we're still getting top-class racehorses. American Pharaoh was a horse that could be right up there with Seattle Slew or Affirmed or Spectacular Bid. Justify is a very nice horse who's turned out now to be an amazing stallion, just beginning his stud career. We got a horse called Flightline that ran a couple of years ago that many people, he only ran 6 times in his life, but oh my gosh, he was amazing. And he was compared by some to Secretariat even. But the state of racing as a whole is very much in flux, right? Competition for the gambling dollar really is driving the financial struggles that a lot of racetracks are having right now. Because back in 1974, for the centennial of the Kentucky Derby, you didn't have legalized sports betting anywhere, really, if I'm not mistaken. You didn't have this plethora of casinos that have popped up everywhere. Vegas wasn't as big of a thing then, unless you were in the Rat Pack, as it is now. Atlantic City didn't have casinos at all in 1974. So really, if you were interested in gambling, and obviously many people were, going to the racetrack was pretty much the only legal way to scratch your gambling itch. Now, it seems like there are casinos on almost every corner. And so there's a tremendous amount of competition for the gambling dollar. And, that has really impacted horse racing over the years. Also, you don't get as many people at the track anymore because it's a lot more convenient for people to sit at home and gamble on their computers and, enjoy that sort of access that wasn't available years before. On one hand, it helps people bet more easily, which is always good. But on the other hand, it takes away from the on-track atmosphere that so many people experienced as a youth that got them interested in horse racing to begin with way back in the day. So horse racing is trying to struggle now with the on-track experience versus the convenience of betting at home. And, it's whereas in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 1970s, right? The big 3 in American sports were baseball, boxing, and horse racing. Now, obviously, NFL, NBA, all the other major professional sports, and horse racing has been knocked pretty far down the ladder there.
We're in Pasadena, just a few miles away from Santa Anita, and last year they had all those issues with the horses that were dying. Does something like that have any kind of long-term effect in hurting the sport?
I would have to. It would absolutely have to. I mean, there'd be no way around it. Because look, in 1974, in the Centennial Kentucky Derby, there was a horse in that race named Flip Sal, who suffered an injury during the running of the race, and that kind of thing today. But back then, it received a little bit of coverage, not a lot. The day-to-day injuries that horses had, which were much more common than they are today, received almost no news coverage whatsoever. Now we're at a point, and I'm not complaining about it because it's probably an advancement in humankind that people are a lot more sensitive to animal rights. They're a lot more sensitive to injuries that horses suffer during races. And that's why that the industry is paying so much attention and spending so much time and so much money, more than ever before, on making horse racing absolutely as safe as possible for the equine competitors. There's no way to completely eliminate injuries because even in the wild, horses, when they're at the farm, when they're romping free in the paddocks, they run into fences and they step into holes and things like that. But but yes, it has had an impact, I think. But it's something that racing is really, really putting on a full court press to try to address.
I've seen it firsthand, being at Patriots or Bills or something like that. When I would go in and talk to a PR person, and there'd be someone else, and I'd say, "Yeah, I've got Randy Moss here with me," blah blah blah, and you know where I'm going with this.
I know where this is going. Right.
Especially with the fact that, I think of all places, I'm like, Randy, you live in Minneapolis. You could have gone, anywhere else. But I just wonder if there's one funny story you have about showing up and they look at you and they go, am I being pranked? Because of course there's the famous football player Randy Moss, who played with the Vikings for forever. So you're in the same city, by goodness. Do you have something that jumps out at you that you kind of knew right away that they were expecting something different?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of funny stories. I've actually I've met Randy a few times and DM'd him, and we've exchanged messages and all that down through the years. He thinks it's kind of funny too. Probably the one that sticks out the most is when Randy Moss was going into the draft from Marshall. And I was working at the time for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram newspaper and covering a brand new racetrack in the Dallas-Fort Worth area called Lone Star Park. And at Lone Star Park, every year they had Dallas Cowboys Day, where back then, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, Daryl Johnston, Nate Newton, Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson, they would all come to, I think they might have even been Barry Switzer at that point, I'm not positive, but they would all come to the races and they would take turns presenting trophies in the winner's circle, and they would be feted up in the suite to free drink and free food, and it was just a big Dallas Cowboys party. All right. Well, Randy Moss, I happen to know this because my wife worked at the Marriott Hotel by the DFW airport. Randy Moss was in town for his pre-draft visit with the Cowboys, and he was staying at the Marriott. So it coincided with Dallas Cowboys Day at the racetrack. I get a phone call. I'm in the press box from someone at Lone Star Park in management. Said, hey, Jerry Jones is in the suite and he wants you to come up. He wants to say hello. So I said, really? And I said, well, okay. Well, they said, do you know Jerry Jones? And I said, no, I've never met him. We're both from Arkansas. I know he's been to the races in Arkansas a lot when I was in the newspaper, giving picks and things like that. And so I know he knows who I am probably. He probably wants some horses to bet on. So I go up to the press box. As it turns out, someone in the press box mentioned my name, and Jerry Jones heard it and said, Randy Moss is here? And they said, yeah, he's here. Well, where is he? He's in the press box. The press box? Why is he in the press box? Call him and tell him to come up. I want to say hello. So lo and behold, I walk up to the suite, walk in, and Jerry's bellied up to the bar in the suite, and I walk up to him and Mr. Jones, and he turns around, looks at me, and he says, yeah. And I said, Randy Moss, and I held out my hand, and he kind of took a step back, and he looked at me, and his eyes got kind of big, and he said, oh, Arkansas. Oh, I thought you. I said, I know. And then I got a little bold, and I said, so what are you going to do? He said, what do you mean? And I said, are you going to draft him? And he said,
Oh.
no, I could never draft him. And I said, why not? And he said, if I drafted Randy Moss, the media would destroy me. And I said, since when do you let the media run your football team?
Yeah.
And he said, since about 6 months ago. This was during the episode when they had all sorts of shenanigans
Drug
going on
issues
off
and-
the
The
field.
White House. Yeah.
And the Cowboys had brought in Calvin Hill as sort of a mentor to some of these people. You know, Michael Irvin was getting in trouble all the time. Nate Newton was getting in trouble back then as well. And Randy Moss already had a little bit of a reputation coming from Marshall with previously Florida State, Notre Dame issues. And he didn't want to risk it.
Isn't that funny? And so they
Wow.
don't draft him, and the media's been killing him ever since for not drafting him.
That's really funny because Bill and I are Cowboys fans, and we still remember that Thanksgiving game. I think it was Moss's rookie year,
3
where he
touchdowns.
just torched the Cowboys, absolutely torched them.
I don't know why they don't have a show, Moss and Moss.
Well, yeah,
You know what I mean?
You know what's funny about that Thanksgiving game? About 4 years ago, there was this little thing to do on Twitter. I forgot what it was called, but you would say something on Twitter to make someone think it was you, and then you would put up a different picture of someone that had your name, but wasn't you.
Yeah.
Okay. So Randy Moss on Thanksgiving Day said, you know, I'll never forget, you know, playing the Dallas Cowboys that day, and put up a picture of me. And the whole thing went viral. And so then I got my Randy Moss jersey on and carved up the Thanksgiving turkey and had a picture taken. My wife took a picture of me, and then I responded to his post, and it was like a little funny back and forth. But it all revolved
awesome.
around that Thanksgiving game when he absolutely destroyed the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he
And
did.
I'm not a Cowboys fan, so I loved it.
The only reason I loved it was I was a Cowboys fan. I was sad, but I had Randy on my fantasy team.
See?
So I was like, hey, okay.
You're a traitor. You're a traitor.
I am.
Hey,
I'm a
Mark-
mercenary. That's
Mark,
what I am.
Do they have fantasy leagues in horse racing? You should be in one.
That leads me to this, Randy. I have a friend, a good friend, who is very much into digital horse racing. Have you seen
I've heard
this?
that. I've heard about that.
Where and I'm talking there is a lot of money on these and it's like a Sims thing. They breed their own horses. They have these stables. It's nuts. Do you know anything about it?
Not really. There used to be a video game way back in the day where you could do all of that. You breed your own horses. You controlled them as a jockey, right? You picked the races that they ran in and stuff. And I got kind of hooked on that for a little while. But someone just told me about this, what you're talking about, like maybe about a year ago, and said you got to check this out. This is really something. This is pretty advanced, and people are really loving this digital horse racing game.
Well,
I'll send you a link, but I'll wait till after the Derby because I don't want you to be sidetracked.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
What a
I
good
appreciate
man.
it. Always thinking of others.
Speaking of odds, we have a 50-50 segment that we
Yes.
do here.
Yeah, so basically it's a trivia segment. I give you a 50% chance to get a question right from 50 years ago. So we're going to do the little horse racing theme. There was a movie in 1974. It was called Dead Cert. And believe it or not, it involved steeplechasing, bookies, and guns. So this is a combination. True or false? The famous actress Dame Judi Dench was in that movie.
Give me the name of the movie again. You cut out on me.
Dead Cert. C-E-R-T.
Dead Cert.
Took place
I'm not
in
familiar with
England.
it, so I'll say false.
No, it's true. Actually, Judi Dench was in it. But it's weird because you see the cover and it shows this horse, steeplechasing horses, and then you see a guy in a gun in a car, and I'm like, that's just so wrong on so many levels.
Yikes. Yikes.
Is that the only question?
But the good news is, the good news is you don't lose anything.
With another one?
Well, here's
Mark,
the
give a
thing, as I
second.
tell everyone: if you get it right, Randy, you get nothing. So there's no.
You don't
there's-
lose anything.
You didn't lose anything at all. And Mark comes up with these movies nobody's ever heard of.
yeah.
So
I haven't
I know
heard of
that
it.
Yeah.
exists.
Judy
I wanted
Dench
to
should have
say-
been my clue to True. He wasn't just going to make up
Yeah.
Judy Dench.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
right. Thinking about that, yes.
Yeah. Hey, Judy, you were in that gangster horse movie, right?
yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Hey, before we say goodbye, I'm sure people ask you this all the time, but is there a horse or two that's not the overall favorite that's coming up this next week that we should keep an eye out for?
Kentucky
Our trip to
Derby.
Cancun.
There's a horse I mentioned, Justify, the Triple Crown winner in 2018, and how good of a stud he's becoming. He has 2 horses in the Derby this year. One of them is a horse called Just a Touch, who was second in the Bluegrass Stakes in his last start. He'll probably be in the 10, 11, 12 to 1 range. And I think he has a decent shot to win. More of a shot to win than his odds, I think, are going to indicate.
Just a touch.
I'm looking right now.
I like
here.
it.
Yeah.
Mark, bet it all.
Brad Cox. Yep. We're all going to Cancun now.
That's
Yes,
right. I'm
yes.
betting some Bitcoin.
Randy, I know it's a incredibly busy time for you, so for you to give us your time at this juncture of the year is really nice. You can come out of the janitorial closet now. We got a seat for you where you can actually see the race, and I really appreciate you spending your day with us. So thank you so much.
Anytime, guys. I enjoyed it. Take care. Happy
Thanks,
150
Randy.
at the Derby.
Yay.
Thank
You know, there's a guy who obviously at age 13
Knew it.
loved it.
Knew
and
it.
So when he's 14 is Secretariat, when he's 15 is the 100th year running,
Right.
and he's made a life of it. I mean, he's a horse racing
Savant.
Savant, right,
Yeah,
yes,
it's
really is.
amazing.
I was thinking about that. Think of all the horses that they have to memorize.
yeah.
And then the thing about it is, race is over. Erase it all.
Yes.
Yes.
Don't need. I mean, maybe they run again in 2 weeks at the Preakness or whatever. But for the most part, you don't need. You have to know all this stuff, and then you don't need to know it ever again.
But what do you say? He's going to learn it all, and 7 a.m. the next day, he's on a flight to
Right.
do something else.
to head.
I mean, that's what I was thinking. How does he, because what do we do when we see an announcer on TV? We think they're having the greatest time. Oh, the World Series, they're sitting there eating hot dogs. No, they're working.
Right.
6 a.m. to midnight. And you did the Olympics, so you sort of have an idea
Right.
that you're having a good time because you love sports,
Right.
but you're not out there, sucking down mint juleps,
Yeah.
hanging around with Prince,
You really enjoy it after it's all done. You
Yes,
look back on it, that was
yes.
great, but boy, it was a lot of work. So, hey, Randy, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. For the record, I only have one. I got Lee Elder, like I mentioned earlier, wins the Monsanto Open, and by winning this tournament, he qualified for the 1975 Masters. He'd be the first African American to ever do that and play at Augusta. So he was quite a pioneer in the world of golf. You guys got anything? Faces in the crowd?
Bart
or-
Connor.
Bart
Yeah.
Connor?
Yeah, Bart Connor.
Bart Connors faces the crowd.
Yep, he was. He won the state as a sophomore at Niles West High in Skokie. He won the state high school all-around gymnastics title with an 8.59 average. He obviously went on to the Olympics, won a couple gold medals. He married Nadia Comaneci, and also Lori Costin. Scott, you know a little bit about her.
Yeah, she was a little 8-year-old wee little thing who was an unbelievable tennis player at that age and was a prodigy. But she was taken away from her family and her coach and sent to the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy at like age 13 or 14. And like a lot of kids, she just wasn't ready for that switch. She wanted to be around family and friends. And so here's this girl that was, I from what I've read, what this article that we found in Sports Illustrated a few years later, she was unbelievable. She was beating women that would go on to have long careers.
Andrea
in tennis.
Jaeger.
Andrea Jaeger. And we're talking, she would win matches 6-love, 6-love. It was considered like she didn't play her best if someone got a game off her, let alone a point. So anyway, she was headed towards a career in tennis, and then she just had enough. She stopped playing and gave it up. I believe she has since had a long career as a tennis pro, teaching people. but did not have the tennis professional career that many thought she was headed towards. I mean, she won this tournament here 10 and under, and she was 8. So she beat 9. The difference between, 8 and 10-year-olds at that time is dramatic. So anyway, just this little tiny one paragraph thing on this 8-year-old girl, and Bill goes and digs up this article, and that's just her story. There's many other kids that suffered by going, turning pro too soon.
Well, they said that when she was playing Andrea Jaeger and dominating her. And right, like the changeover, Andrea Jaeger went over and said, "Man, you look fat."
Right.
And that basically destroyed her at the time, and she didn't win another game.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's just, you look at
They're
these kids.
kids.
We're kids. You look at them and go, "Oh, look at him. Look at little Tony."
Right.
You don't realize they're just children.
Yeah.
And you burn out. And that's what she did. But her story has a good ending. It's a real nice ending.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up. Anything?
I got something from the
19th hole?
19th hole. It says,
to me. Go.
This is Barbara Green. This is talking about the article about sportscasters from a previous issue. She says, sports usually comes at the tail end of a broadcast, and the viewer has to sit through often uninteresting trivia to get to it. Last, but most significantly, I wonder if Curry and DeFord ever realized that maybe most television sportscasts are badly done because they are done by men.
Well, Barbara's a big fan of ours.
She is.
Yes.
And anyone that's done this, as we've all done, how many times have they put us at the end of the sportscast?
Oh.
And how
always.
many times have they canceled the sports?
Or if they run long, you
Yep.
need to cut.
Yeah. Oh, you got 30 seconds.
You got 3.5 minutes. There's a high-speed chase. You got 3 minutes. Someone got murdered. You got 2.5 minutes. It's going to rain tomorrow. You got 2 minutes.
We're not bitter. So don't
No.
think so.
So, all right. I want to thank Randy Moss for joining us. A fountain of information on a sport that used to rival that of football and baseball and basketball. Horse racing, got the Kentucky Derby coming up. Randy will be a part of the NBC Sports crew, as he always is. And next week, as we mentioned, Bernie Perron, the Hall of Fame goaltender for the Flyers, is joining us. Got a busy month. As we mentioned earlier, we got Tommy John coming in at some point. A lot of good guests. As always, Jeremy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Billy, say goodbye.
Bye.
Mark, say goodbye.
Bye.
I'll say goodbye. Bye. We're past our prime. Talk to you next week. Later.